In this video, I'll demonstrate access control in Linux through the application of groups and permissions on directories and files. A demonstration on how to add users, how to add groups, how to add users to particular groups, and then assign permissions to directories so that only certain users or groups are allowed access to those directories. So here's the architecture of what we want to do. We want to create 3 users, one called head honcho, one called middleman, and one called little guy. We have 3 directories that I've created. We have one called public. These are nested directories. Inside public is a directory called org, and inside that is a directory called important. Off to the side here, this indicates who should have access to these the contents of the directory as well as the directories. That is, the ability to CD to the directories and read its contents. So for the public directory, everybody should be able to CD to the directory as well as read the contents of the files. In the org directory, only the head honcho and middleman can read the files in here and CD to the directory. And finally, the important directory, only the head honcho should be able to CD to the directory and read the files underneath. Now, I've added an application called tree, which you can do by doing sudo aptitude and tree. And what this does is it gives us a nice little graphical representation of the directories and the contents thereof. So we've got a public directory that has a file called public.txt. We have a directory called org that has a file called org.txt, and finally one called important, which has a file called important.txt. Now, I've already added 2 users. I've added head honcho and middleman, and I've added 2 groups. And to make it a little easier to follow, the groups I've created mimic the actual names of the directories. So I've created one called org and one called important. So what we need to do now is add a user called little guy, and we need to add a group called public. So let's type sudo add user little guy, and we give it this password and the name. We won't worry about the ancillary information in here. So I've added 2 of the groups, and we just need to add the public group. So we type sudo group add public, and we can see that we've added those groups by catting the etc group file. Go to the bottom, and of course we see we have a head honcho, middleman, and a little guy group, which matches the username of the individual being added. And then we have an org and a public and an important group. Now what we need to do is we need to add the individual users to each of these groups. So to public, we want to add head honcho, middleman, and little guy. To org, we want to add head honcho and middleman, and important, just the head honcho. And this is really an overly simple example. What I'm trying to do is illustrate how you'd create users and groups, and how you would add those specific users to the groups, and then change the permissions on both the directories as well as the files, so that you can limit and or allow access to the particular directories and files. And so the first thing we need to do is that we need to type sudo usermod -G, which means we need to add group membership for a particular user. And so we want to add public, org, and important. Notice the spacing here for head honcho. And we need to add usermod -G public and org for the middleman, and sudo usermod -G public for the little guy. Now we can make sure that we've done that appropriately, and it's showing up in the group file. And you see head honcho, middleman, and little guy are now in the public group. Head honcho and middleman are in org, and just head honcho is in the important group. Okay, let's clear this. Let's look at the permissions for the public directory. Notice that it's owned by me, his username, and my group. Notice that the permissions: read, write, and execute for the user, me; read and execute for my group, PC; and read and execute for others. The first thing we're going to do is change the ownership of the public directory. We need to decide who we want the owner to be. Well, we don't want the owner to be little guy, because at this level we may want to have dozens or hundreds or thousands of people who can have access to public, and so we need to decide whether we want or head honcho or some other high level person to be the owner of the information. And typically in an organization, the person who is most responsible, at least from a business standpoint, would be the owner of the information. In this case, this simple example, let's make this head honcho. And so we can type sudo change owner head honcho and public. And we see now that the owner of this directory is public, of the directory public is head honcho. We still need to change the group. And we could have done that in one fell swoop, and I'll do that on the next example. But let's do this in 2 steps right now. Sudo change group public, which is the name of our group, and then the public directory. Let's take a look at that. See, head honcho and public are now the owner and group of public. Let's go ahead and let's cd to the public directory. And why was I allowed to do that? Because PC is not, I'm not head honcho, and I'm not a member of the public group. That's because you see the permissions over here for other. That's anybody who's not the user head honcho, and anybody not in public will be in the other category, and therefore I was allowed to cd to this directory. Keep that in mind. We'll need to keep that in mind for later when we change the permissions on these directories and the files. So we see we have a file in here called public.txt. Well, who do we want to be able to read that? Well, we want head honcho, middleman, and little guy, and anybody else we add to the public or the org or the important groups. So pretty much anybody else. And so what we need to do is to change the permissions on that file. But let's go ahead first and look at the org directory. Let's change the permissions on that first. And so we sudo change owner. We want head honcho, the owner of the data for the org group, for the org directory. Sudo change group to org for the org directory. Let's see if that's what we have here. Head honcho and the group org are now owners of the org directory. Let's go down one more level and take a look at important. And now let's do all of this at one time. Let's change the ownership of the for both the user and the group. So sudo change owner head honcho dot important for the group, and then the important directory. And we've changed both the owner and the group for important. You can also see for the parent directory that head honcho in public, and for the current directory head honcho in org. So we have our nesting here. Okay, so let's look at this file important.txt. Let's go ahead and change the permissions of this file here. We only want it to be read. First of all, we need to change the ownership of this file to head honcho and the important group. And so we can change sudo change owner head honcho and important for important.txt. We see now both the current directory as well as the file is owned by head honcho, and group ownership is important. And now we need to change the permissions on this, because we want the owner to be able to read and write to this file. We also want anybody who is in the important group to be able to read and write to this file, but we don't want anybody else to be able to read nor write to this file. So how do we change the permissions over here? Well, it appears that the owner information is correct, but notice for the group information they have no write access, and also others are able to read this file. Change the permissions with the chmod command. And so if we're using octal notation, the R and the W, 4 plus 2 is 6, so we want to maintain that. For the group ownership, we want read and write access, 4 plus 2 is 6. And then we don't want any type of access for others, so that would be a 0. Type important.txt. And you see now that the owner and group membership has read and write privileges here for the file important.txt, and that's what we wanted. Let's go up one directory to the org directory, and let's look at permissions for important. Notice there's read, write, execute for the owner, and there's read and execute for the group public. Well, we want the important group to be able to write to that directory, but we don't want the other group to be able to access the contents or even list the contents of this directory. So we need to change the permissions here. Let's clear the screen to make it a little easier. And so type sudo chmod read is 4, write is 2, and execute is 1. Recall from an earlier video that you must have the read and execute bit set if you want somebody to be able to CD and read the contents of the directory. So 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. We also want the important group to be able to read, write, and execute. And for any others, we want 0. Let's type important. Let's go back and look and see if we have what we want. Read, write, execute for head honcho, read, write, execute for important, and other will not be able to CD to the directory. Now recall that I'm not head honcho and I'm not a member of the important group, so let's see if we can CD to that directory. And access is denied. Permission denied, which is what we wanted. Now for org.txt, first of all we need to change the ownership and group information of this. So we type sudo change owner, and once again head honcho is going to own the file, and the org is going to be the group. Give the file name. Let's do a directory listing. Now head honcho is the owner and the group ownership is org, which is what we wanted. We need to change the permissions of that file so that the group can read, write, but nothing else except the owner. So we type sudo chmod, and we want 6, 6, and 0. Org.txt. Take a look. Is that what we got? Read, write for head honcho, read, write for org. Org.txt. Let's see if we can cat that file. Permission denied because I am neither head honcho nor am I a member of the group org. Okay, let's go up one step to the public directory. Let's clear this. And so we need to change the permissions of the org directory. And so once again, Notice that it's currently owned by head honcho in the group org, which is correct. So we need to change permissions. Oops. Change permissions. The read write execute is correct. We also want to change the other to read write execute and take away all permissions from anybody else. So that's 770 org. Let's see if that's correct. Read write execute for head honcho, read write execute for org. Let's see if we can cd to the org directory. We cannot. Okay, so now we need to change public.txt to change the ownership. Sudo change ownership, and that's going to be owned by head honcho and anybody in the public group. Let's see if that did what we want. Head honcho went public, and we want anybody who's either head honcho or in the public group to be able to read and write to this file, and no one else. If we need to add anybody else, we can always add them to the public group if we would like to read it. And so now we type sudo chmod 660 as we did with the other files. Public.txt. It's read write for head honcho, read write for public. Let's see if I can read that file. And I cannot read it. Now, scope, we need to make one more change. And to the public group. And this doesn't necessarily mean the public at large, but just public within the organization. At least for this simple illustration. So read write execute for head honcho, of course. We want read write execute for public. And we don't want anybody else to be able to access that unless they're in the public group. And so we sudo chmod 770 as we did before, public, and we've got what we want. Read write execute for head honcho, read write execute for public. And now, since I've created these directories, let's log in individually as each of those users and see who can access what directories. So we can type exit, and let's log in as little guy. So we can cd to the demo directory. And why could I access the demo directory? Because it's got the read and execute bit set for the current working directory. And I should be able to get into the public folder, which I was able to. And let's see the file in here, concat public.txt. The public document, that's correct. Let's go to the org directory, and I cannot read it. Let's try to jump to the important directory. Can't read it. And let's just do an ls.org, and it won't allow me to list the contents of the file either. So that's what we wanted. Let's type exit, and let's log in as middleman. And let's cd over here to the demo directory. See what we've got. Let's cd to public directory. I can cd because I'm a member of the public group. I can cat the file. Let's go to the org directory. And I can cd, and I can do a directory listing. Cat the org.txt file. An organizational document, that's great. cd to the important directory, and I can't do it. Let's do an ls on the important directory. I can't do it, so the permissions were applied correctly. Let's type exit, and let's log in as head honcho. cd to directory, So public, yes, I can access the file. Org, and I can cat that file. And finally important, and can I cat that file? Important.txt, yes, it's an important document. So the permissions were applied correctly for both the files as well as for the directories. Now let's do one more thing. Let's go here, and I need to get out of this and log back in as myself because those guys aren't in the sudoers file. And let's add another user to the let's add another user called another middle. Add user another middle. It's going to be another middleman, and we're going to put him in the org and public groups. Another middleman. That's correct. Okay. Let's clear that. Now we need to add another middleman to the two groups org and public. So we type sudo usermod-g, and we add public in org. Notice the spacing for another. Spell that right. Another middle. Let's go to our Etsy group and see what we've got. Notice another middleman has been added to the public and to the org group, but not the important group. Another middleman. There we go. And let's cd over to this directory. So I should be able to cd to the public directory, and I should be able to cat that file. I should be able to cd to the org directory. I should be able to cat that file. I should not be able to cd to the important directory and do an ls on it. No. And so you see how through the addition of groups and adding users to particular groups, you can provide access control to both not only the directory, but also even listing the contents of the directory, as well as the files that are housed in those directories. This will be part of your next assignment, so I would make sure that you go through this video and try to mimic what I've done here, and set yourself some other demonstrations that you come up with yourself to make sure that you understand these concepts.